friends, it's Elizabeth. I am the student director here at Pinnacle Church. If we have not met, thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. We've been talking about injustice the past couple weeks, which we have defined as the things in our world that are not right, that are unfair, or that are unequal. It's painful to experience injustice, and it makes us all ask the question, why doesn't somebody do something? It's even worse when injustice is ongoing, systemic, and constant. Last week we talked about how God sees and cares about what's happening. God is anti-justice, and part of following Jesus means we care about the things he cares about enough to do something. So maybe you hear that and you think, that's great, but what about me? If you've been the victim of injustices like racism, oppression, discrimination, or prejudice, then you know what that feels like. Or maybe others are thinking, that's not me, that's not my story, and I get that too. But as family, when one of us suffers, we all suffer. That's why I want to challenge you to really lean in and practice what we talked about in our first week. Be curious. So if you're experiencing injustice or have experienced injustice, what do you do? What do you do when you feel like you're alone in that? And with that in mind, I want to tell you a true story about 3 friends and what happened to them. There was a Babylonian king named Nebuchadnezzar who was very powerful and had conquered and captured Israel. One day, he built a giant golden statue that stood 90 feet tall. That's humongous. And ordered everyone to bow down to worship the statue whenever they heard certain music playing. If they chose not to do as ordered, they would be thrown into a blazing fire. Sounds like, really nice compromise, right? So the Bible tells us that there were 3 Jewish men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were worshipers of God, and they refused to bow down to the statue. So you could probably guess that the king was not thrilled by this news, and he ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought to him. He gave them one more chance to bow down and worship the statue, or they would be thrown into the fire. But these 3 men stood their ground. They believed that God could rescue them, but even if he didn't, they didn't want to turn from their devotion to him. And what an incredible example of courage and faith. Like, you're faced with a pit of blazing fire. That's terrifying. So, of course, the king is in full range mode now, what we call Big Mad, and he orders the fire to burn 7 times hotter than usual. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are tied up and thrown into the fire. The furnace was so hot that the soldiers who threw the men into the fire died simply from coming near the flames. So now look, I get none of us have been thrown into fires recently, but I think we can all agree that this seems pretty unfair. And many of us do know what it feels like to be treated unfairly, maybe to be discriminated against for your skin color, or treated like we're less than because of our family finances, held back because of our gender, or considered less important because of something we have absolutely no control over. And if you've experienced this, you know how it can be scary, frustrating, and sad. These guys, I'm sure, felt all of those things. So let's continue with the story, and I want you to see what happens next after they were in the fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisers crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was there a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. In a moment of extreme injustice, they were not alone. God did not abandon them or leave them to suffer on their own. And in the same way, you're never alone when you face injustice. So let that sink in. When you experience injustice, you do not have to face it alone. God cared about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and made sure that they weren't alone in their suffering or their injustice. Did things change eventually? Yes. Did the laws change as a result of the injustice? Yes. But don't miss what happened even while they were suffering. God cared for them, and in the same way, God cares about you and doesn't want you to be alone when you face injustice. Maybe you hear this story and you feel the injustice part. Maybe you're so tired, so hurt, so burned by things you've experienced that you don't know where to turn. And I want you to know that you do not have to be alone. God is with you. He hears you. If you're processing that for the first time or just don't know what to do next, here are some steps for you to consider. Talk to Jesus. Remind yourself over and over that you're not alone. Remember that He will send others to be with you. Talk to your small group leader or talk to a trusted friend or adult. Consider talking to your family about getting help from a professional counselor or mentor who can help you process the injustice you've experienced and begin to heal. And keep moving. The guys in the fire did not give up. So let's be honest, you shouldn't have to do anything about the injustice that is affecting you. Others should step up. Generations older than you should have figured this out by now. It is extremely unfair, and all that is true, but at the same time, doing nothing isn't always helpful, so keep moving. Some of you, however, may have heard this story and thought, I haven't really experienced injustice. We all participate in injustice in some way, often by allowing it to happen while we watch. If that's you, I want you to know you can talk to God about that too. In Psalm 139, the writer opens up and asks God the most beautiful question. See if there is any offensive way in me. So start there. Ask God to help you see ways that you have participated in injustice. This is so important because the truth is, some of the people you care about most, your friends from school or your small group, they have been on the receiving end of injustice. And maybe for the first time you see it differently and you care differently because of how it affects them. So let it become personal to you as well. When injustice happens, it is painful, but you don't have to do something alone.